College Football Nerds here talking LSU and Florida State. Florida State's already got one win in the bag. I've got Josh with me in the bag, getting nerdy with y'all. And if you haven't seen much from us content this summer, it's because YouTube stops recommending us because we take a little bit of a break. So if you're subscribed and you haven't hit that notification bell, hit that notification bell and then go over to our homepage on YouTube or check out the links in the description. We did a great NIL series. We did a ton of game previews, team previews, and also, if you'd rather listen to us, we have a podcast too. All right, Josh, let's get into this game. Probably the hardest game to predict of all of the week one games. We've spent half an hour discussing it. There's so much turnover for LSU, not just that coaching staff, but also it's transfer city, y'all. We've got some suspensions, some players that aren't going to play. We'll get into Florida State in a second, but I want to talk about LSU. And, LSU fans were really frustrated with us over the years for not being super high on Ed Orgeron. And a lot of it was the game day, and not just game day, but like the overall program management kind of things, the nutrition programs, the, setting up tutors, the running the coaches and the practices and all the logistical stuff. And we've got Brian Kelly, a guy that can really, of all the, non-Saban coaches in the country, he's one of those that really can do all this. He's the adult in the room. And we've always been very high on Brian Kelly. What he accomplished at Notre Dame was really tremendous. Josh, one, I'd like for you to give a quick note on kind of your thoughts on Kelly v. Orgeron, and two, is what he's going to really inject into this program in terms of improvement something that can really show up week one, or is it something that is collectively kind of over time permeates the program and gets it better, but, being that adult program might take a little bit of time?
I made the comment on Twitter when he was first hired that I thought Brian Kelly was a home run hire because, as you said, we've been critical of Ed Orgeron. We were critical of Miles as well. I've always believed that what LSU has is a lot of talent. They have a really high energy environment, and really I think what LSU needs the most is a coach that kind of keeps it all under control and directs it in the right, proper direction. I was hypercritical really of Orgeron from day one, and that was based a lot of what I knew about him from stories of him from Ole Miss and where he had been previously at other stops. He is a guy that when you take over as an interim and you have all the pieces in place and it's just about doing whatever you're doing week in and week out and keeping people motivated, yeah, he does well. When you talk about building a program for multiple years and you talk about having a training plan for each player, having a positional plan for each player, having a nutrition regimen, having an academic regimen, he falls short. And we saw a lot of things that fall from that. And I know there's a lot of individual decisions that come into it, but I don't recall ever seeing Nick Saban have your starting running back be declared academically ineligible for a game and then a few season and then a few games, right? So those are the sorts of things that he fell short on, and I think Brian Kelly's going to bring that to the table. Now, for the question of where Brian Kelly's going to make his impact, I think if you had a different roster, it might be year one. With this roster, he's made an impact because he took in a lot of transfers, but it's not quite the situation that you would have liked to have been in. If they could have hired Brian Kelly a year prior and maybe retained some of the guys that they lost out the past year, you might be having a different conversation, right? If you had last year's offensive line, last year's defensive line and defensive depth, I think maybe this LSU team would have a little bit of a different spark from Brian Kelly. But as it is, this year he's kind of taking in enough transfers to hold the ship together and just try to keep things afloat. And when you talk about being the needing an adult in the room, it kind of comes to the assumption that LSU is always going to have elite talent. Right now, I'm not sure they really do, to be blunt. And so the question is, how long is it going to take him to get enough talent to do the sort of things that LSU fans need him to do? And how much patience are LSU fans going to show him given the roster that he inherited?
And I think that LSU fans are savvy enough to know that, look, there needs to be some patience. And on the flip side, like it's pretty safe in my mind to think that they're still going to be better this year than they were last year. They've got a less talented roster this year, and they're going to be better than they were last year. There's some questions at quarterback because we don't technically know who's going to start. But in general, I think that he's got a little bit of work cut out for him for sure. Looking at Florida State, there's not much we can learn from Duquesne. Now, I will say that it is a positive that they didn't struggle with him, which is something that we've seen in the past. Losing to Jacksonville State, almost losing to Samford. Those sorts of things indicate deep issues, but beating a team that lost to TCU 45-3 last year doesn't tell us much in the way of what they're going to be versus LSU. A lot of credit is due Florida State because they're playing 2 Power 5 out-of-conference teams. They got that game with Florida every single year, and they're playing a neutral site game in New Orleans against LSU. By the way, the point spread's 3, Josh, which 3 points, LSU's favored by 3. This is a pick'em that nobody knows anything about, and they're giving LSU 3 points for what's really home field advantage. Maybe touch on what you saw, if anything, maybe personnel-wise or schematically in the Duquesne game that might carry over as a benefit at least early in the game against LSU.
As you said, it's hard to judge much of anything from a game against Duquesne, but I do think it's probably more helpful than a spring game, which is all I have to go by for LSU. The biggest thing I noted is that Florida State did look cohesive. In particular, the offensive side of the ball. I thought their offensive line looked competent. Really, for the first time that I can remember, they looked really competent. I don't know that you can ever say someone's good. I know they had a great, basically just ran it down Duquesne's throats with a bevy of backs, but it's Duquesne. But the trick is, in prior years, they've had guys that just look totally out of position playing offensive line at all. They had busts left and right. I didn't see that, and that was encouraging. I'm not sure how the running backs are going to do, given that I don't really feel like they have a lot of power at the position. I think the wide receiver position, it's kind of a shame to see Wilson get banged up early in the game. I'm not really sure where they're really at. Micah Pittman is a solid receiver. I'm not sure if you want to talk SEC standards for whatever that is or isn't worth. I'm not sure that Micah Pittman isn't much more than a solid SEC player, really. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they're a solid, cohesive group offensively. Defensively, there were some busts against Duquesne, which is about all you're ever going to see in a game like that. You're not going to really see guys get beat too much just because it's an FCS opponent. That was a little troubling, not shocking given the roster turnover. So that's really where I came out of it, is a Florida State team that looks like they're rebuilding. And that's the interesting thing coming out of the prior conversation when I talked about where Brian Kelly was and the situation he was in and how I don't know, how much patience people will have because he can't make the impact you might like to have. I feel like it dawned on me, you could really have the same conversation about Mike Norvell and what he inherited at Florida State. That roster had gaping holes when he took over. And yeah, there were some inexcusable losses that have happened, but football's a game where it's often really, truly defined more by your worst player out of the 22 than it is your best. And there are some positions where Mike Norvell just inherited just total deficiencies. And so now I think you're kind of seeing that roster really through a lot of transfers, very, very slight amount of development that's been allowed to take place. It just hasn't been enough time get to a good point. And what you end up left with, and I think this is where we're probably going to turn the conversation, is 2 teams that are relying heavily on transfers to fill holes with a lot of turnover to such an extent that trying to figure out what either one of these teams really is going to look like just feels nigh on impossible.
Yeah, and one place that there might be some concern for LSU when we talk about transfers is last year they didn't have a great offensive line, and they've got a lot of new faces this year. Now, you like to talk about how sometimes if you weren't great the year before and you've got new faces, it can be an upgrade, and that's possible. But my concern is we're going to have a new face at quarterback regardless. Not a ton of experience in the skill positions, though there is some talent there. And then we've got a lot of new faces on offensive line. That's not a great combination, I think, for offensive cohesiveness, at least in week 1. But one of the things I want to do, we did this in a couple of other previews, and I think it was a lot of fun. So I'm going to let you run with the first one here as well. If we're thinking maybe halfway through this game, not even talking about score, just talking about what we're seeing on the field in terms of scheme and matchups and what's kind of happening on the field, what's going to be an indicator to you based on what you see that Florida State is in trouble?
I think the indication that Florida State is in trouble is probably going to come down to whether or not the receivers can get open. The LSU secondary has a lot of new faces, probably more new faces than, I'm going to go on a limb, probably than any team has really ever had in terms of players that haven't been in the system before. That's maybe as many as, if you're in a dime set, maybe 5 out of 6 defenders could be transfers. It's pretty unprecedented. Some of them are pretty good players, like Joe Fucha. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Safety, the transfer from Arkansas. It's been in Arkansas for a while, considered a pretty disruptive safety. You get transfers from Arkansas, another transfer at Arkansas at linebacker. You get a transfer from Oklahoma at corner. You get a transfer from Louisiana at corner. There's just transfers all over the place. And I think that that's happened because, especially with like Eli Ricks leaving, they lose another corner, kind of traded with Arkansas in a weird way. There's a lot of questions whether LSU's secondary was going to be just hugely problematic. And if you watch them play Kansas State, that back seven was FCS level bad. It was really, really, really bad. And I think Brian Kelly did what he had to do to bring people in. But my concern there is this is, to be honest, a desperation situation, and no one's quite sure how well it's going to work, particularly in like a communication scheme side. Are they going to have any idea what they're doing with all these players from different systems all playing on the same team? So if Florida State can have their act together, you'd think they're going to be able to capitalize on that some. And if they can get some separation, things are going to work well. But if they don't, that front for LSU is pretty good. I mean, Roy and Smith are good defensive linemen. Mason Smith is a hard guy to move. And you've got Gay and Ojolari on the outside that are really good pass rushers. And last year, when they dialed up the aggressiveness in the second half of the year, LSU's defense was a completely different unit. So the real question is, can you get enough separation to get the ball out and expose the secondary, make the linebackers back up, and then you can kind of deal with the defensive line? If you can't get separation, if you let LSU play aggressive and focus on their just general speed in their front seven, I think your ability to move the ball well, just running it like you did against Duquesne, probably ain't going to really pan out. And then all of a sudden, Jordan Travis has probably got a little more on his shoulders than you'd prefer. And so to me, for Florida State, that game of your receivers, can Micah Pittman, and they used him a lot in the short game, I noticed, against Duquesne, which is interesting. A lot of times in those games, you don't really throw a lot of receiver screens and whatnot because you don't want extra contact on your players. But it felt like they were really trying to get him used to that role. And I think they're going to try to get yardage on the outside quickly. And if you can make hay with that, it's going to make everything else easier. And if you can't, I think the defensive pressure that LSU can ramp up is going to become more and more oppressive very quickly.
So for me, if Florida State is kind of winning this game and LSU is in trouble, I think it's going to be because Jordan Travis is having a day. I wasn't super high on him when I first saw him playing, and you weren't super high on him either, but over the course of last year, I felt like he got a lot more comfortable. And, there's the offensive line. I mentioned LSU's offensive line for a little bit, but the offensive line at Florida State's been a running joke in college football. If they're giving him time to operate and he's throwing the ball or he's running the ball and he's having a lot of success, I think that might spell doom for LSU because I'm not sure how much production LSU's going to get offensively. To me, it's a question mark. It's not a definite they're going to struggle. I don't know. I really like Noah Cain. I like him a lot. I liked him in Penn State. I like him now. Keyshawn Boutte is one of the best wide receivers in the country. Who's going to be throwing the ball? Who's going to be protecting the quarterback? I don't know. So if Jordan Travis is having a day, then that means they're putting up points, and I'm not sure LSU is equipped to keep up with that. I think LSU, because of what we think might be stars on the defensive side, and especially schematically if they can be aggressive, I think for them to win, it's going to be those people that are shining, the defensive side of the ball that's shining, and they're keeping this kind of in a low score. I just don't know if it can happen. So that leads us a little bit into score projections. Josh, why don't you start off with this one? Remember, Vegas has got an LSU -3, laying 3 there in New Orleans. Tell me what you got.
I think LSU is probably the safer pick here. That's just why Vegas has them by 3. Man, even at the time we're recording this, I'm not sure in my head where I want to put it. Just for the sake of picking against the spread, I'm going to say LSU 27, Florida State 21. There's no result that will surprise me. I wish I could just not pick this game and not have to have it on my ledger. I feel like I have zero confidence in knowing where these teams are. In particular, Jermaine Johnson was the sack leader at Florida State. He leaves. Now they're going to rely on Verse, who's a transfer, to hopefully be their primary edge rusher, and he's facing an offensive line that's going to be predominantly composed of transfers. So how do you really evaluate a game where a lot of the biggest matchups are a set of transfers playing a set of transfers? And to be clear, when I say set of transfers, particularly on the LSU side, by my count, there were 26 players in and out of that roster. 26. That's, about a third of the roster, which means in terms of freshmen and sophomores, when you factor in the guys that went pro, the guys that graduated, about 2/3 of the roster are new faces. I just, nobody knows. I don't think beat writers know. I don't think anyone knows what in the world we're going to get from LSU. And Florida State isn't all that far off. So, yeah, I'm going 27-21. Nothing will surprise me. I think the biggest deciding factor really is going to be how well does that transfer group of offensive linemen and transfer group of secondary for LSU hold up. If they allow a lot of pressure, those offensive skill players for LSU aren't going to shine. If they give up a lot of points, it could end up being a high-scoring game they could lose. But at the end of the day, I just feel like LSU has a set of skill players, particularly Boutte, who I think was the best player wide receiver in football last year before he got hurt. I think they have some guys that are enough of difference makers that they are going to give them enough of an edge to win the game. I'm not sure Florida State has quite the same level of guy, first-round draft pick kind of potential guys, and LSU does have a couple of them. And I think that's enough to give them the edge. But, man, I don't even know who the starting quarterback is going to be. I think it's going to be Jaden Daniels. Everything I saw in the spring game, they definitely looked like they were building a scheme to have a dual-threat quarterback. That was my read when I was sort of interpreting how they were running things, the way they were orienting the offense. But we don't even know that for sure. So predicting this game is more than a little bit difficult.
Yeah, it's tough for me too. When we started discussing this game early in this conversation, I was leaning towards Florida State because I do like Jordan Travis, and I do think that having some consistency there with Norvell year over year is going to help. Because, not only do you have Brian Kelly coming in, but he's not bringing his staff from Notre Dame. Reese is still up there, and we've got someone who hasn't called plays as a defensive coordinator since 2018 at Kentucky. These are the things that we as pickers are looking at, and it's a little bit of a challenge. But the thing that you touched on is the thing that tipped the scales for me. Noah Cain, Keyshawn Boutte, I can see them making a couple of plays that make the difference in the game. I've got 24-20 LSU, and I really picked that as a Price is Right kind of $1 thing. Get me just over that 3 points so I can make a definitive pick one way or the other. But we're in high variability territory, my friend, and I think that very few outcomes would surprise me in this game. I do think, though, Josh, and I'll let you put a point on this as well, the winner of this game is going to come out of it with a lot of momentum based on just the seasons they've had recently and the trajectory and the hope that's going to come out of this game. What do you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. In either case, whoever wins, I think it's going to feel like maybe they've got some stuff together. And anytime you have this many new faces on a roster, particularly I think transfers can be particularly bad in this way, you need a little bit of a spark to create some team cohesion. And I know we're a cold-blooded, reptilian, analytics-based channel, but the reality is that football is a sport that's played with a lot of heart. And I think whoever wins this game is going to feel a lot differently about how their season's going to move forward. I think the loser is going to kind of maybe feel a little bit the opposite. But I will also say one of the biggest challenges here, man, this game could be 45-45 in the third quarter, and I'm maybe the offenses are great and maybe the defenses are a train wreck. I mean, just evaluating either one of these teams out of this game because they're both have so many questions is going to be extremely difficult. I think it's going to take probably 3 or 4 weeks. Really, the Mississippi State game for LSU. I think for Florida State, maybe we'll get it as soon as next week. Or no, they have a week off, don't they? So it's going to be the same weekend. They play Louisville on the 16th, which is a Friday, I believe. I think we won't really know what either one of these teams is until that date, no matter what the outcome is. One team blows each other out, whatever. But I definitely think winning this game is a big step towards trying to get a little momentum and get a little cohesion and keep things rolling in the right direction.
All right, well, that's it for us on LSU and Florida State. Remember, 2 pieces of homework for y'all. First one is, man, if you don't have that notification bell hit and you want to see more from us and you want to get it when we release it, hit that notification bell, hit that subscribe button. Second thing, as you always know, in the comments, we need your score so we can mix it up with you. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. Enjoy week 1 of college football. It's always fun. God bless.